chapter 10, verses 34 through 45. When James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And they replied, "We are able." And then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." And this is the word of God for all the people of God. Thanks be to God. Almighty and everlasting God, in whom we live and move and have our being, you created us for yourself, so that our hearts are restless until they find rest in you. Grant to us such piety of heart and strength of purpose, that no selfish passion may hinder us from knowing your will, and no weakness from doing it. In your light may we see life clearly, and in your service find perfect freedom. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Now, we're going to continue our dive into the radicalness of Jesus' proclamations that we find throughout the book of Mark, and by examining what it truly means to be a servant or being served by others. Now, Jesus in this passage, the passage of Mark, he attempts to convey this mentality to 2 of his disciples. And similar to the rich young ruler from last week's sermon, his 2 disciples cannot truly delve deeper into what Jesus is trying to tell them. Now, this common occurrence happens throughout the Gospels because Jesus, being fully divine and fully human, is not something that we as Christians and the disciples who were Jews at this point quite understand. There's a humanness to Jesus, but there's also that divinity. He is the Son of God. The disciples don't know this. They just look at this person who's performing miracles and doing these incredibly radical teachings, and he's something that they just can't put their finger on. Of course, we're no better, since we're human beings as well. But that doesn't stop us from attempting to understand what it means to serve rather than be served. Now, we see ourselves as the disciples during our Christian journey, attempting to see past the fog of our own limitedness into the truth about the purpose behind why God became flesh in his Son, Jesus Christ. Now, and furthermore, we seek to understand what it means to be redeemed through the death and resurrection of the flesh that was God. Now, within the context of this ministry narrative in the Gospel of Mark, this passage finds itself after the rich young ruler engaged Jesus, and after Jesus in Mark 10, verses 32 to 34, foretells his death and resurrection at the cross. So right before here, James and John ask, right before that, Jesus foretells his death for a 3rd time throughout the book of Mark. And now, furthermore, this passage takes place within the book of Mark before Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem while riding on a colt, which we have come to know as Palm Sunday. And this is the pinnacle of Jesus' ministry, where he is beloved and hailed as a hero who has come to Jerusalem for the purpose of liberation. Of course, we all know what happens 5 days later after Palm Sunday, on Good Friday, and what happens and and what happens afterwards, basically, and how confused we become. Now, all of this context provides us insight into why James and John make such a bold request to Jesus as quoted in Mark 10, verses 37. Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory. Now, this particular passage reeks of an infusion of what they believe Jesus has come to do on earth. They're expecting something after their journey with Jesus and their witness of his many miracles and teachings to the people. Jesus' otherworldly nature manifests itself early on in the book of Mark, and the disciples pick up this otherworldly nature, but interpret it in a different way. Now, Jesus even provides them insight through, as I said before, the foretelling of his death and resurrection in Mark 10, verses 32 through 34, but also the other two prophecies, basically. Mark 8, verses 31 through 38, and Mark 9, verses 30 through 32. So as I had said before, there are 3 times when Jesus foretells his death and resurrection. But each time, the disciples cannot understand this. They can't balance that with these wonderful miracles and these wonderful deeds that Jesus has performed. They are kind of like us, like I said. They want something. There's something behind their minds that they're giving up everything to follow this man and be and to find out who he is. But they're seeking something different. And what they're seeking truly is something that we see in Palm Sunday, all the people that hail him as a hero. They're seeking liberation, but in the form of the violent overthrow of the Roman Empire through Jesus, who has these wonderful powers. Now, what we find here is the disciples commit one of the great pastoral blunders, which, as I said before, is to project their own feelings onto somebody. In this case, they have the aspirations of glory and of being the ones who will liberate their people while being at the side of Jesus, the King of Kings, come down to conquer oppression. And this is why I can't really preach this on top of the pulpit, because when it seems so far away, and it's elevated above y'all. So, bear with me. And now the idea that Jesus proffers in Mark 10, verses 43 through 44, of a servant king, it actually goes back to the Old Testament in 1 Kings chapter 12. In the story, Solomon passes away after reigning in Israel for over 40 years, leaving his son Rehoboam to rule as his successor. Rehoboam must now deal with the cry of the Israelites, who, according to 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 4, they ask to lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke he placed on us, and we will serve you. Now the people in the northern part of Israel request from the new king, Rehoboam, Solomon's son, to lighten the taxes and forced labor that Solomon had placed upon them from which to build these great these building projects. That's what Solomon was known for. Now, Rehoboam, who at first, as a new king, doesn't really know what to do, so he seeks the counsel of the older generation of Israelites to ask for what he should do in this particular situation. These old counselors were the people that counseled Solomon during his day. And they say, this is why it ties into the book of Mark, if you will be a servant to this people today and serve them, and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. Now, that sounds like something that's what Jesus is harking back to. He's asking Rehoboam, the older council is asking Rehoboam, you need to listen and serve your people. You need to stop this exploitation and be a good king. And defined as a good king, someone who's going to lighten these taxes, stop this forced labor. Because remember, in the story of Solomon conscripts his people. He enslaves them, basically. Enslaves his own people to build these great works to God, which is not in keeping with God's will, no matter how much Solomon wants these great projects to be. It is not what God envisioned. Furthermore, this is actually what Solomon is an example of the overarching story of what happens when human beings, and the children of Israel in this case, choose, in the book of 1 Samuel, choose a human king over a godly king, in this case God. The mystery then becomes is that God gives them what they want in the form of these kings who rise and fall, to include David, Solomon, Saul, and in this case Rehoboam. This is not good. This is not good at all, because invariably in the stories of 1 and 2 Kings, the kings turn corrupt, they become selfish, they don't follow, except for Josiah, they don't follow the will of God, and they end up, in this case, being enslaved by Solomon. Now, you would think, because Rehoboam goes to the advice of this old council, that he would seek it, but he doesn't. And instead, he seeks the counsel of his friends, who are the new generation, and they're hot-blooded and passionate, and in a way are probably products of their own time. And they tell him, no, you will not do that. Instead, you will continue to enslave them, continue these great works of God. And that backfires, basically. The northern kingdom revolts, the northern tribes revolt, and establish the kingdom of Israel, as opposed to where Rehoboam is in Judah. So they split the kingdom, and that's the thing. And that's kind of a fascinating story as well, of the history of what happens when you don't become a servant to your people and placed in a position of power. So you can already see that particular philosophy or that particular way of ruling, how it comes down to us today. In many forms of government, not just our own. Some places that we've been to that obviously are not really keeping the tenets of God. And so now we go forward to the book of Mark, in which Jesus recites the exact same wisdom in his dialogue with James and John. But like Rehoboam, they project what they want into the dialogue instead of what is being actually told to them. James and John expect Jesus to be another Solomon or another King David, who will first liberate and then possibly conquer outside of the old kingdom's borders so that God's will can be realized on earth. James and John, similar to us, and we're guilty of it as well, they want Jesus to be something he is not. Something, in my opinion, like we say, that is an eternal desire. We want something out of this divine being rather than accepting what he actually is. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear the fact that the man, in this case Jesus, who they left everything for, turns out to be something they didn't expect. But in a way, how could they have expected anything else? Since at the end of the book of Mark and the other 3 Gospels, and the beginning of Acts, and after Christ appears to them in his resurrected form, do the disciples truly understand what they witnessed in Jesus Christ? So I believe that projection of what they want on him is something we have to change within ourselves, so that we might become the servant who serves, as opposed to the one who's being served by others. We must be like Jesus, not like Rehoboam, or in this case, what James and John want. And it is in the transformative power of Jesus Christ and his ability to heal the most wretched person in this world that we as imperfect human beings see and feel the transformation within ourselves when we let Christ into our hearts. And the idea of servant leadership from Jesus Christ is actually something that is inculcated into the very core of how we teach, do, and explain leadership today. So, not to get off topic about my service in the military, I don't want to relegate this to just a Western way of doing things, but servant leadership has always been something that has been proffered and in some ways beaten into my head since I was a young lieutenant. We found that not ruling over people, but serving them towards a higher cause and helping them and taking care of them and leading them and molding them and guiding them, while at the same time being molded and guided and taught by our own subordinates, invariably creates something. It creates a community within us. It creates something that is that gets the mission done, so to speak. That's why I'm kind of down here right now, is that as uncomfortable as I'm feeling right now. Being with y'all, as opposed to preaching from some faraway pulpit, is kind of the idea behind servant leadership, is that there is a community right here, as I'm walking amongst you, trying to learn from something from y'all, and hopefully y'all learn something from me. This doesn't just relegate itself to the military. This has relegated itself to our lives as well. We serve each other in the church. We serve each other even in business. Although that kind of seems far away now with giant monopolies, but I can't help but think that small businesses that we go to and that you've interacted with in your lives truly serve the community by being servant leaders and wanting to do good through the interactions and transactions. What you do as an Uber driver for these two is wonderful in a way. Particularly wonderful because you brought them here. But that's a wonderful thing to do, is that people need this service you provided at an affordable rate, and everybody benefits and lives in community. And I guess one benefit is you get to be in church with us. But at the same time, servant leadership is hard because of the two-part interaction and transaction that is required. It's easy for me to get on that pulpit. It's easy for Rehoboam to sit on his throne. It's easy for, not to use imagery, but a board of directors and shareholders to sit in a corporate building far away and make decisions on your behalf without your input. It's harder to get into that, to get down with the people and to recognize that the decisions that you make might have some very lasting consequences. And it's always important to understand that there's a human dimension behind making those decisions. There's consequences. And why what Jesus is advocating is so radical at this time. Because, during the time of the book of Mark, and during the time of the Synoptic Gospels, power is not diffused between the people. Power is centralized in the hands of the few, or in this case, the Roman Empire, who seems so far away and yet is making decisions on behalf of the children of Israel, that are not good. And along comes this man, Jesus, who has come to save the world, but in his own unique way, it is God's way. And why the blindness of the disciples to who Jesus really is detrimental, but also something that we can truly understand, because I can totally understand what they want. Well, not really, because we're not a country that is living under occupation, so to speak. That's something that I think we lack in our blindness. We might be blind to. James and John have probably grown up under the auspices of the Roman Empire as second-class citizens. That kind of living and resentment cannot help but manifest itself in their behavior, their views, how they look at the world, what they want. And along comes this man, this Messiah, or something that they don't try to fully understand, who can offer them everything they ever wanted. Well, we come to find out, as we've come to find out in our life, that Jesus doesn't give you what you want. In this case, God. He gives you what you need. And what was needed was saving in a different way. Not a violent coup, not taking up arms against the Romans. And in a way, salvation came through there. And so, my friends, as we begin the fall today, and participate, not to get more modern, but as we, next week is when voting takes place. As we participate in our civic duty, that is voting in the midterm elections, always remember that we too must be guided by what Jesus taught us during that time. And we must always be guided by that one servant leader, the God who became flesh, in which to spread the true purpose of his will and his plan. And let us never forget that it was the radical biblical teachings of servant leadership extolled upon this world by Jesus Christ that continues to guide us, shape us in how we treat one another, and how we exact Christ's will upon this earth, through how we lead people. And most importantly, always remember that we must never stray from these teachings, this idea of servant leadership and being served, the idea that we must never sink to the level of Rehoboam and project ourselves onto that. And just like James and John, like I said, we must never let ourselves be blinded by our own projections in what we serve. For in the end, we need only to look to the life of when God became flesh to see what it truly means to be served and not be served. So as you go to the voting booths, Jesus and his teachings will always be with you, and they'll shape you and guide you through what we're about to do through this very momentous time, against the backdrop of an endless God. Amen.